We're still in chapter 1, and I think I got through 4 or 5 of the 11 subcategories in chapter 1 up to this point. And I got into the next 2 this morning, which is the first one is be gentle with your inner control freak. And then the other one is gut check your ego. The first one, this concept of be gentle with your inner control freak. This is, I think, somewhat counterintuitive at times for people, in that I see a lot of entrepreneurs that get way too wrapped up in making the product perfect. And I think it's really natural because, a lot of people that come up with products are engineers, or, you might be, and it's way more comfortable to work on the product and make the product perfect than it is to get out and sell. And so people are scared to death of sales. And so what they do is they just keep working on the product. The issue there is that you don't know what your product is at the beginning. You don't know what's going to work, what's going to sell. And so you can sit in a room all by yourself for weeks, months on end, tinkering with your product and trying to make it perfect. But until you figure out whether the customer is buying it or not, or what they're buying it for, or what it is that they're buying from you, the value you're bringing, until you know that, it doesn't matter, right? So I think we have to care about quality, but so many entrepreneurs, I think, get really obsessive over the getting the product exactly right. And this translates into our world too. So when we have franchisees, franchise owners that come into our business, I'm always amused by the fact that whatever their area of expertise was prior to being in the coffee business, prior to signing a franchise agreement and opening a store, they tend to obsess over that category, whatever that is, whether it was they were in tech, or they were in real estate, or they were in marketing, or they were in, right? So they'll start picking that area of the business apart in great detail, right? And it obscures what they should be focused on, which is getting it open and getting as many people to walk in that front door as possible on day 1, 2, 3, and so on. So get it good enough and get it out there, and then you'll figure out what's working and isn't working, and you'll figure out how to sell more and more and more. But get it good enough, get it out there, and start selling it. Perfect is the enemy of good enough. The other thing about this idea of internal control freak, and this is a little nuanced, but so many people go into business, they worry about limiting their downside, and they get really wrapped up in limiting what could go wrong and limiting their exposure if something goes wrong. And the problem with that is that limiting your exposure is fear-based, and fear gets in the way of progress and growth. And so you'll see people who spend, in the book, I talk about, spend, let's say, for example, on your lease agreement. Yeah, everybody will come at you with the 35 things you got to get done in a lease in order to protect yourself. Oftentimes, landlords in a startup situation, with which most of our businesses are, they're not going to be that willing to give on those 35 things, right? And so you can get in a big, huge debate, discussion, negotiation with a landlord over these 35 things, or and spend $5,000 in 3 weeks to a month negotiating, or you can spend an afternoon, $900, and get the 4 or 5 things that are actually important, right? And then move forward. And again, it's this concept of perfectionism, getting that lease exactly right on how you want it, gets in the way of your progress. And this is, again, I think, counterintuitive for many, and I see it. People struggle with it when they work in their business. And then the last point in here is, and I don't know why I put this in this chapter, but I did. It was all around this legal negotiation. And what I said here is that, lawyers are worth their weight in gold. But the key is understanding when you need to overrule your lawyer. And you do have to overrule your lawyer. And I know, Lawyers are rolling over in their graves right now, right? But I make a joke in this chapter where I say, like, don't worry, if you buy into my philosophy, we'll have enough money in the end to pay you, the lawyer, to help get us out of our sticky situations. So it's going to be good for you in the end too, right? So anyway, that's this concept of be gentle with your inner control freak. The second one here today is gut check your ego. I think this is the 6th bullet point in chapter 1. And I start this chapter out with this concept of if you're not okay being, if you're opening a Big B, if you're not okay being, quote, a humble barista in your store, if you're not okay with that leading into being a humble shop owner with an apron on, then I think this business, you could struggle, because the backbone of this business, in my opinion, is really being a great barista and then being a great shop owner and then working on that foundation to build one heck of a business. We have franchise owners, and I know many of you have heard this, where they come into our system and they're very quick to tell you they're not here just to own one store, right? They're here to own 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever. And they're here to build multiple units. And you hear that all the time. And it's always a red flag for me, because then I'm like, okay, like, cool. But like, let's make sure we understand the fact that you got to be a good barista. Then you got to be a good shift leader. Then you got to be a good assistant manager. And then you got to be a good manager in order to be a great store owner. And then you can start building on that and end up with multiple units, right? So that's that gut check the ego, right? Like, sure, I want everybody to aspire to own 50 of these things for sure, right? But it's the fundamentals, and you got to gut check your ego and make sure you learn those fundamentals before you can become a, quote unquote, successful business owner, whatever that means to each person. But are you willing to admit you have it all on the line? Okay, this is another concept where I get frustrated, because when I watch people in the business, sometimes they'll like kind of dip their toe in the water, and they won't go all in on the business. They won't commit their life. They won't commit everything to building a successful business. And here's my little theory on that. My little theory on that is that if you commit your whole life to it, right, and you go all in, 100%, right, you throw yourself at it, and it doesn't work, then that is a failure on you, right? Like, you went all in and it didn't work. If you just dip your toe in the water, right, and don't go all in, and then the business doesn't work, well, then there's all kinds of excuses you can make for why the business didn't work, all kinds of external factors and so on, and it isn't you. Right. And I know that's a nuanced thing, but that's an ego thing to me, right? Like if you got to plunge yourself into the business 100%, go after it fully. And then, yeah, you know what? If it doesn't work, that means you failed. And that's a hard pill I think for some to swallow. I like the feeling of this statement, which is, when you open your business, you got to take your ego and you got to wrap it up in a little velvet bag and like cinch the top. Then you got to put that at the bottom of your sock drawer and cover it all up where it's going to be safe. Because someday you'll be able to go back and unwrap it and pull it back out. But at the beginning, like, you got to let that thing go, right? And you got to be ready to get dirty, right? You got to be ready to get coffee grounds underneath your nails, and you got to smell like coffee when you go home, and you got to be all in. If you worry about what people think, then their no's are going to matter. And you hear, and growing a business, you hear so many no's, right? So many people say no to you. And if you worry about that, if you worry about them and what they think of you or think of the business, then that no matters to you, right? And you can't let that no matter, right? You got to believe 100%. And I get a little graphic in here, and I say, like, watching people act like they don't need the sale is the most curious, confusing thing to me. And you see it all the time, right? Like, they're almost too good to ask for the sale. And what I state here is you need to be willing to beg, bleed, scratch, claw for every single sale. And if that isn't your mentality, I worry about going into the business. Everyone's negative. So many people are negative when you open the business, right? And that's sad, but they're just going with the statistics, right? So how many businesses actually make it to 5 years and 10 years and 20 years and so on? Well, they're all, and the fact that so many people are negative, it's really hard on your ego. And that's why you got to put your ego away in the sock drawer, because you can't let that affect your attitude. Finally, one of the problems with ego, and I've got a long story I tell in the book about somebody that came into our business who was a very, very successful business manager. Ran like $100 million division of a major corporation. So that meant he knew business, right? And he got into the business and he was struggling. And I remember having a conversation with him at one point. And I said, the problem is in your world where you were before, that revenue stream, that 100 million was a given. Like, it was a given. It was going to come in no matter what. Now you're in a situation where you can't admit that you have to figure out how to generate the revenue, right? And the ego, it's powerful, and it gets in the way of you admitting you've got a lot to learn. And so, to me, when you go into a new business, again, I think I talked about this last week, it's 2 years of learning before I think you even actually start the business, right? You got 2 years of an education in the business before you actually start it, and the ego gets in the way of that, right? So those are the next 2 bullet points in this concept of due diligence on yourself, which is chapter 1. And the first one is be gentle with your inner control freak. And then the second one is gut check your ego.